Coming to you on Secular Media Network, this is the Atheist Manifesto, your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. I'm your host, Callie Wright, and I am joined by my co-host, Jonathan Moore.
Hello!
And Daniel has the week off. Today's episode is titled, Share This One With Your Friends. See, the folks that I hear from that listen to this show generally are the kinds of folks who already either understand what we as queer trans folks go through or are honest about their lack of knowledge and very willing to learn and be educated. For all those folks, this episode is for your friends and family who may be more skeptical of the things we have to say and haven't had the chance to hear them from the mouths of people who have been there. What we want to do today is sort of frame the context in which queer and trans folks live our lives. We're going to relate some of the hardest parts of living our lives and the things that we've struggled the most with. This may not be an easy episode to listen to, but these stories are important to tell. Jonathan, let's hear yours.
Well, I thought about this for a while, and you know, being gay isn't easy, and being an atheist isn't easy, and being both at the same time can really be not easy, as I'm sure many of our listeners can relate to. And no, I'm not saying I've ever suffered any physical harm for being gay or being an atheist, but, you know, I've been made fun of and told how wrong I am and accused of things that weren't true. I think I shared it on the show before, but when I first came out as gay, I still hadn't discovered that I was atheist and was pretty deeply involved in a Messianic Jewish congregation. Since I have both Christian and Jewish ancestry and heritage, and I just felt that was a good fit for both. So, you know, like Chris Micah, yay. And so while I was there, I was trying to be like a big brother to this kid. He was like 12 years old, and he needed someone, you know, just to hang out with. His dad was busy with work, and he had a bunch of other siblings, and his mom was recovering from breast cancer, and so he just needed, you know, someone to hang on. He was kind of a nerdy kid, like I was, so I saw a lot of myself in him. And then I at one point came out, and I came out to someone in the church in confidence, and of course that didn't work out at all. And I was basically accused of possibly being a child molester, though, of course, nothing of the sort ever had even crossed my mind. You know, just because I'm gay doesn't mean I'm interested in underage children. I'm not. I tend to go towards burly guys, so being prepubescent doesn't go in that direction. So, yeah, so I was really horrified by the entire ordeal, and I actually ended up moving to a different state because of it. The kid's now in his early 20s, and we've actually reconnected. He actually hunted me down on Facebook, and we've talked about what happened a little bit, and he understands why I left, but I think he kind of thought that it was his fault, which it wasn't. It was his parents and other people in the church's fault. You know, and that was something that, you know, that really hurt me, you know, really badly. You know, I'm a very nice person, and it just really hurt me. So, as far as on the atheist side of things, I spend a lot of time being accused of having like no sense of morality, which I think also being gay kind of compounds, because of course, you know, being gay is a moral defect. I get preached at a lot by people, family, as my family is all still, you know, fairly religious, and I try to have a reasonable argument with them, but then I get shut down because, you know, the person is unwilling to listen to me. You know, I try to explain why I believe what I believe. You know, I tell them, you know, that I, you know, believe what I believe because I have, you know, let me try that again. I, you know, try to tell them I believe what I believe because I believe things that I have evidence for, and then they whip out the Bible and tell me that that's the evidence right there, which of course it's definitely not good enough. I know quite a bit about the Bible. I actually know quite a bit about religion. I think most atheists actually do know quite a bit about religion. And in fact, I think I saw a study about that recently, that atheists are some of the most religiously literate people out there. But either way, it just really gets on my nerves that people, don't respect my beliefs. I have some medical issues that can be pretty bad at times, and someone who I live with wanted me to go to church with them recently to get prayed for. I politely declined and thanked them for their concern. But then they, wanted me to defend my beliefs. And, told me, well, what could it hurt? Even if you don't believe it, it couldn't hurt to do it. But it made me really uncomfortable and made me feel like my beliefs are not being respected at all. I try to be respectful of other people's beliefs. Maybe sometimes I try to be respectful of other people's beliefs, but sometimes maybe I'm too respectful. I feel so often that other people try to push their beliefs on me and, feel that I am completely wrong and don't think that I have any right to believe what I believe. I had someone tell me that in the United States that while we have a freedom of religion, that does not mean that we have a freedom from religion, and that atheism should not be allowed. And I just thought that...
I hate that so much.
I know. It just really, really bothered me.
Because the First Amendment says freedom of speech, not freedom from speech. So that means that you're not ever allowed to not talk.
That's right. That's right. Exactly.
It's the dumbest.
Yeah. And in fact, if you go into the writings of the Founding Fathers, they actually, in their interpretations of the First Amendment, is that the First Amendment? Sorry, I don't have my Constitution handy. And the freedom of religion specifically is freedom from and of religion. In fact, I recently took a quiz that was the U.S. citizenship test. How would I pass? By the way, I got ILMS 3, but one of them was about that amendment, and it's specifically the U.S. citizenship test defines it as freedom of and from religion.
Right, which is how it's been interpreted pretty consistently by the Supreme Court when those things come up. So going back to the topic at hand here, talk to me a little bit more about this kid that you mentored. Because I think to myself about things like that and how you can lose things like that through no fault of your own because of some aspect of you that really doesn't have anything to do with the thing that you're doing. Like, I lost a job over transitioning, and it was a job that I loved in a field that I saw myself being in for a very long time, if not forever. And the fact that I ended up having to leave that job to be able to transition, and I'm in a better place now. I landed on my feet, but I didn't know that at the time, and I didn't want to be put into that position. And I remember being so angry that the years that I put in training and learning all of these things and being better than my boss, frankly, at a lot of these things, none of it mattered. None of it mattered because so many of our customers would be uncomfortable with me, looking like a girl instead of looking like a guy and being Callie instead of the person that they knew before. So talk to me a little bit more about what that feels like. I feel like that's probably somewhat of a similar feeling. I mean, I just felt like a bunch of people that I knew and thought were my friends just turned on me on a dime. It was just bizarre. It's been like
over a decade. So that was in my early 20s. I'm in my early 30s now, but in fact, he's the kid's about the same age I was when that happened. But yeah, it just I feel like I lost, a friend. Like I said, he kind of reminded me of me. And he still does, like I said, we still keep in contact, over Facebook, and he's just graduated from film school. He's he's a nerd like me, we talk about Doctor Who and stuff, and he's a really good kid. We would just pal around, we'd hang out, go to see a movie, or go get something to eat, or go to the thrift store or something, and get him something that he didn't need and his parents didn't want him to have. Just hanging out,
which is kind of like the uncle thing, right? Like that's what an uncle is supposed to do. So that's kind of the role that you are filling, it sounds like.
Exactly. We just hung out a lot, and I think he at that point, he knew, like I said, his mom had just gotten over breast cancer. When I reconnected, I found out, unfortunately, it came back and she died. But at the time, she was in remission and recovering. So,
yeah, I just, I hear so often people say things like, well, I grew up poor, I grew up in the trailer park, and I was able to get out, and if I can do it, anybody can, and these kinds of things. And, while I understand where that sort of thing is coming from, I think what a lot of those people don't understand is that, privilege doesn't necessarily mean that you have all the advantages. It just means that it's easier for you to gain those advantages, if that makes sense. Someone that I work with, we were talking about feminism and, equality and opportunity and, working hard to get where you're at and all that sort of thing. And I brought up my job situation. I didn't have really any formal education. I went into the job with relatively, I would say, like a mid-level of knowledge about the field. And, we did basically 6 different things, and I had really, really good knowledge about one of them. But I love the industry, and it's what I wanted to do. So when the guy who was above me, who was the lead, quit unexpectedly, I worked 100 hours a week for like 2 or 3 weeks, just trying to learn all of the things that I had to learn to do my job. I put in the time, I put in the effort. A lot of it I didn't get paid for. Some of it I got paid for. My boss would send me to trainings, and I would spend a lot of time reading on the internet and going through forums and putting all this effort into getting good at my job. And at the end of the day, that didn't matter. Yeah. None of it mattered. And I remember being so unbelievably angry that it didn't matter how hard I worked. It didn't matter what my skill level was. It didn't matter that I'd put all this effort into helping my boss in his business. The fact that I was trans made none of that matter. And I think that experience is probably far more common than a lot of people think it is. Yeah.
And I think it is. And, I used to work for a company where, it was kind of the opposite of that. They kind of had this they were a big multinational company, and they kind of had this attitude of, we really don't care who you are or what you are. As long as you do your job and you do it well, we could care less. And in fact, having lots of different perspectives actually makes us a better company because, we might think of something that a bunch of, white straight male guys in suits might not have thought of. And that might be good for business. So ultimately, they cared because it was better for their bottom line.
Right, which
is okay.
I've said before on the show. I'll take equality either way I can get it.
Yeah.
I would much rather change people's hearts and minds.
Yeah.
But because diversity is good for business. I think there's science behind that. having diverse perspectives in different communities. I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing to put that forward as like, look, it's good for business. It's good for employee morale. There's really no negative to it. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that. And I think it's okay to use that as an argument. The company that I work for now is very much that way.
Yeah.
And I'm glad they're that way. But, that doesn't necessarily stop the sort of microaggressions that,
right.
and I'll talk about it a little bit more in my segment later.
Right, yeah.
But the little subtle things,
joking, not even joking around the water cooler kind of stuff.
Well, and sometimes it's even more subtle than that. It's just seeing how a person interacts with all of your coworkers and recognizing that they don't interact with you that way. And it's not, necessarily a vicious, like, treating you badly kind of thing, but, where they're super friendly and helpful to everyone else, it's more of a reserved, polite, strictly business sort of thing. They're just doing their job when they deal with you, but they're being buddy-buddy with everyone else, that kind of thing, where they're not really treating you badly, they're just treating you differently. Yeah. And I think sometimes it might be difficult for people to understand how taxing that can be when you recognize that kind of thing going on.
And I'll say, definitely, I used to work in customer service, so, that's also an interesting perspective, especially when you're getting these calls, from various people out in the public. Even if the company is, very polite, like I'll say I used to work in customer service for one of the major hotel companies. I won't say which one. Every year around the time of San Francisco Pride, we would get calls complaining from people who didn't know that Pride happened in San Francisco for some reason. And kind of dealing with that was a really hard part of the job because you couldn't make an opinion either way. You just had to.
Right, and the people on the other end of the phone were not so gracious in reserving their opinions, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly.
And knowing that, I've run into that a little bit in my job. I do phone tech support, and I don't have the most feminine voice. I get misgendered constantly. On the phone.
I did too, even though I'm a cis male. I
really?
I got called ma'am a lot. Yeah.
And those kinds of things, like, I know, like, my voice sounds like a typical guy voice. They're not doing it to be malicious, but that's just another one of those things that just kind of ticks away at your confidence. Right. Just little by little, it's not that anybody's being mean or purposely malicious, like like I said, but it's just another thing that, like, hey, tap you on the shoulder, just another reminder that you're different from everybody.
Honestly, to me, your voice seems kind of neutral. If I didn't know you, I wouldn't be able to tell if you were male or female.
Well, I also run into people on the phone who conspicuously avoid gendering.
Yeah.
I think because of that reason.
Yeah.
Which I guess is a step in the right direction.
Yeah,
maybe.
The worst thing I remember working on phones was when they had an ambiguous voice and their name was something like Robin. Like,
right. And typically the phone calls that I'm on are 7 to 12 minutes long, so it's really not worth the extra bit of conversation explaining I'm a ma'am, you know what I mean, not a sir. It's just not worth it. So sometimes, and you get sometimes those people who are, trying to be super businesslike, but they're really mad. They just keep saying, "Well, sir, listen, sir," that kind of thing. That kind of grates at you a little bit.
I would. My favorite was when they would be calling me ma'am throughout the conversation, and then they'd say, "What was your name again, ma'am?" Jonathan.
Yeah,
sorry.
I was actually telling a friend this the other day that I picked my name so early on that being misgendered hadn't necessarily sort of entered my consciousness as a thing to deal with. And Callie, to me, that is a strictly female. I have never met or heard of a guy named Callie.
Cal, like short for Calvin or something, but not Callie.
Well, and I think that's what people think it is sometimes. Like Callie is somehow short for Calvin or something like that. I don't know. But yeah, it's a little frustrating because I literally had someone mention in a Facebook conversation once they were using they pronouns for me because they weren't sure the Callie seemed like a gender neutral name, and I appreciated the consideration, but it was kind of frustrating. I was like, I didn't think it was a gender neutral name, guys. Come on,
time to start going by your middle name.
Right?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. But anyway, just the last little thing was. Through all that, through dealing with, religion and being gay, I don't know a lot, there's two things I know absolutely, and that there's nothing wrong with being gay, that there is no God. So I'll leave it at that.
You know for sure there is no God. Did you come on?
Okay, on a scale of 1 to 7, I'm a 6, just like Everest Reductions.
Okay, all right.
Fairly
That's fair.
certain.
All right. Well, up next, I'm going to be talking about some of the day-to-day issues I struggle with as a trans person and how those things have colored my life. And we'll be right back with more of the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Grow your library and your vocabulary without ever looking up from your precious little smartphone. Visit atheistaudiobooks.com and start listening in minutes.
Here's an excerpt from Disproving Christianity by David G. McAfee.
Each argument and contradiction presented will bring us closer to disproving the main pillars of Christianity, using nothing more than logical thinking, statistics, scientific and historical data, and Holy Scriptures. The debates between Christians and non-Christians have raged for thousands of years, and I expect the conflict to continue. But I do hope that these arguments will allow those Christians who may not have questioned biblical fallibility in the past to realize that these texts are man-made, and they represent the ideas of those fallible individuals who created and edited the compilation of texts now considered to be the Holy Bible. They contain errors, contradictions, and a stagnant moral code which, in many ways, no longer coincides with the morality of modern man. What I hope to gain from presenting these arguments and little-known biblical passages to the reader is a sense of understanding of Scripture which may not be presented in Bible study or in church, and for good reason. If read with an open mind, I truly believe that this book will open people's eyes to the wonders of free thought in a way that other works utilizing a more philosophical approach cannot.
Disproving Christianity and Other Secular Writings by David G. McAfee is now available at atheistaudiobooks.com.
Welcome back to the show. Today we're discussing some of the things that complicate our lives as either atheists or members of the LGBT community. And as I said in the intro, these stories are somewhat geared at people who may not necessarily understand what it means in a practical sense to someone's life to come out as gay, bi, trans, or any flavor of queer or transgender. One of the things you'll often hear me say when the question comes up of whether or not I chose to be who I am is that, yes, I totally thought it would be a good idea to toss a hand grenade into the middle of my otherwise ideal life, risking my friendships, my family, my job, my support system, my mental health, my physical health, my financial well-being, and my social standing because, oh, well, it sounded like fun. There's a concept I've just recently become aware of called minority stress. It's a concept I've been describing for a while now, but never realized there was a name for it or that it had been studied. Basically put, it describes a constant sort of low-level stress that's involved in being a member of a minority group. See, even though my experience comparatively has been pretty great with family and friendship support and community involvement, this kind of stress is still something I deal with. If anyone's listened to episode 4, they heard me get really emotional over the stress of dealing with public bathrooms. So I'm not going to go into that one too much specifically. Just listen back to episode 4 if you want a better idea. I'll just start at home. Though my family has been largely supportive of me, my relationship with my grandma has been badly strained, And I used to be her favorite grandkid, simply because I'm trans. Being an atheist wasn't a problem. Being liberal wasn't a problem. Living together with my ex before we were married wasn't a problem, but me being trans is. She's convinced that the LGBT pride movement is a ploy to drag people away from God. And yes, that was a sentence that she said to me verbatim. Despite the fact that a pride festival was the place that I first recognized there was a real community here for me to belong to. I deal with little reminders of how different I am every day. See, as a trans person, you sort of start to become hypersensitive to others treating you differently than they would other people. There's the subtle avoidance of pronouns and names, people looking over at you when anything about gender comes up, people in restaurants staring, the hushed conversations that follow. I even had a girl I work with the other day, while reading about some new company policy, she kept looking up at me whenever the he/she thing was written in the policy. There are people who are polite, but don't talk to you the way they talk to other people. There are the people who see you as either an object of curiosity or an object of pity. Many of these things on their own wouldn't be such a big deal, but when combined with each other and experienced almost every day of your life, it takes a toll. A very heavy toll. It's my firm belief, after looking at what's been studied about minority stress, that this is the reason so many of us in the LGBT community suffer from disproportionately high levels of depression, anxiety, and other sorts of mental illnesses than the average person does. These kinds of things make it increasingly hard to enjoy myself in public spaces that aren't explicitly LGBT friendly. This means when I go to restaurants, bars, parties, or any sorts of gatherings where it's not a predominantly queer or trans crowd, I'm automatically anxious. It doesn't stop me from having a good time necessarily, but it definitely sucks some of the fun out of it. Doesn't matter if I have 15 people surrounding me that I know have my back, it doesn't change. Sometimes I go into public spaces and can't convince myself that people aren't staring at me. Every time I hear someone laugh, I can't help but think they're laughing at me. Every time I hear someone whisper, I can't help but think they're whispering about me. And before you think these things are all in my head, for one, these things have actually happened to me, where people were talking about me and laughing at me and not putting too much effort into hiding it. I'm close friends with people who have experienced physical violence for being in the quote-unquote wrong bathroom. I have a friend in the medical field who had a patient assault him when he was found to be trans. I have a friend who went to the emergency room once, and instead of being treated, she was preached at about how no matter what she did, she wouldn't actually ever be a woman. Leela Alcorn stepped in front of a truck on a highway 15 miles from where I live. I delivered a speech in front of a mother whose daughter was murdered for who she was. My community had a memorial just last week for a local trans woman who committed suicide. These are not abstract concepts of things that happen to other people in some far-off place. These things happen to people like me every single day. When I'm in the depths of feeling lonely and hopeless, sometimes I think about what people would say about me if I committed suicide. And that's what reminds me of the value I have. To be clear, I've never actually been suicidal. I've never wanted to hurt myself. But there are definitely times I've thought that, maybe it'd be okay if I didn't wake up in the morning. I sort of think about the what if. It's not that I don't feel like I have worth. In some ways, I actually have a lot of self-esteem. It's just that the weight of feeling this way sometimes really gets to me, and my mind sort of goes to dark places as a result of just not wanting to feel this way anymore. So, in closing, I really hope this sort of gives an idea of the sorts of things that I've personally dealt with, keeping in mind that these are my experiences and that generally speaking, I'm actually pretty privileged in that my friends, my family, and my community have been very supportive of me. I'm dedicated to telling these stories, both from myself and from other members of the community, in hopes that people will come to understand some of the things that we struggle with. Some are unique, some are less so. I would never necessarily try to put these struggles on a hierarchy or anything. Our stories are our stories, and other folks with other experiences have their own, and they're no more or less valid than ours. This was just sort of meant to be a window into our world and the things that we go through.
Yeah. Wow. And I get that kind of that minority stress thing. Unlike being, with being trans, you say that there's people, talking about you and they know that you're trans. Being gay, in some ways, it's easier to just kind of blend in, I guess.
Well, right, but I bet like if you go out with your boyfriend, that changes.
Yeah, but say like I've had an experience where obviously I don't walk up to people and say, "Hi, my name is Jonathan. I'm gay." I it's just another aspect of who I am, and it's like I was at school and I was on the phone with my boyfriend, and someone asked, who are you talking to? Not that it's really any of their business, but I had the dread of, oh great, I have to come out again.
Exactly. You have to come out over and over and over again.
So, and I'm not going to lie, I don't lie about those things.
Right.
But yeah, you're right. Going out with my boyfriend, I've definitely had people, stare and look at me, and I guess they can stare, but whatever. I'm over it.
I'm glad. And honestly, I hope that I get there. I have friends that say that it doesn't bother them, and I'm super jealous because it really does bother me. I wish it didn't.
Well, it takes time. I mean, compared to me, I've been out over 10 years. You've been out for just a couple years. So
coming up on 2.
Yeah. So you're a
so
baby.
it's not been super long. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, Callie's coming up on her second birthday.
Hey, we'll get you a cake or something.
Yeah, I think it's important to express these things because these are things that I don't even necessarily talk about super often because it's little stuff here and there that adds up. It's not this huge traumatic experience that happens all at once that I need to call a friend and talk about. It's, oh, I'm not okay because this one thing happened and I need to talk about this. It's a bunch of little things over the course of time. And, you meet somebody new for the first time. And this is, from my experience, you meet somebody new for the first time and you can see it in their eyes. They want to ask.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you can tell their head is just about to explode because they just have to know.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily a bad thing because it helps get it out there, and get and make it less uncommon, if you talk about it.
Well, right, and that's kind of the struggle because obviously I do this podcast for a reason, and. I do the atheist and LGBT activism that I do for a reason.
Therapy.
But if I'm out at dinner with my friends, like I just want to be a person and I want to, have stupid conversations with my friends where, we make up all kinds of inside jokes and we laugh at each other and we have dinner and it's just fun. And, sometimes I need to turn the activist off. Yeah,
you don't want to be
for my own sake.
Yeah, it's like you hear about like these comedians that they're out to dinner and just want to have dinner. And people are like, "Funny, tell a joke.
Tell me a joke. Yeah, tell me a joke."
Same kind of thing. It's, I would think you just want to have fun with your friends and not be Callie, the trans woman activist.
Right. Like. And obviously that's a huge part of my identity. It's what I spend most of my time outside of my day job doing. I would venture to say I probably spend more time doing it than I spend on my day job. But, that doesn't mean that that's all there is to me. And, sometimes I just, want to watch a movie and eat popcorn or, eat ice cream and just like feel feelings for a minute,
Ice cream is good.
I know, right? It gets to be a lot of pressure sometimes. And, that's, something that I can say. So obviously a lot of this has been sort of dark and depressing. And I will say on a positive note, sometimes I wondered previously, I don't anymore because I feel like these questions have been answered, but, I'm often amazed at how willing people in the atheist community are to have these sorts of conversations. And not just surface level stuff like gay marriage, the stuff that's kind of, if you're at all a progressive leaning person, like that's an obvious thing to get behind. But to have the more uncomfortable conversations about, trans people's access to healthcare and, poverty and homelessness and, queer and trans related violence and that sort of thing. And a lot of times I used to worry that, are people more interested in me than someone else who might have this conversation just because I'm trans? Like, am I just more interesting because I'm a curiosity?
Yeah. Us gay guys have a dozen.
Right. And that's turned out to be all in my head as far as I've never felt like anyone has actually treated me that way. I want to make sure that that's clear. Like there's no one that I've ever felt has actually treated me that way. A lot of times that's the context that I meet someone in because I meet them through the podcast, and that's fine. That's a different thing.
Yeah.
But, once we get past that initial thing and we start to okay, well, we actually have a friendship now. Like, we're just friends, because we have stuff in common and we're good people and we love people and we want to do good things.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've probably mentioned ReasonCon on every episode since ReasonCon. But, I kind of wondered about how that was going to work out there. But, I just hung out and I was just among friends. And that was, I don't know if I could properly convey exactly how much that meant to me and how much it means in general to me, to have the friends that I have and to not be treated like a curiosity or that, everyone's only interested in me because I'm trans. Well, that people are actually interested in me as a human being outside of those things.
And I'll admit, when I first met you, I was curious and I did ask a lot of questions, but then I discovered how much I like Star Trek and we pretty much didn't talk about anything else.
Right, and that's pretty much what our friendship is about at this point.
Yeah. So we're going to do that podcast eventually. That Voyager podcast.
Right. We're gonna fix the world in a little bit, and then we're gonna go do our Star Trek podcast.
The Voyager Manifesto.
Right. We're gonna take a quick break here, and we'll be back with Be a Better Ally on the Gaytheist Manifesto.
I'm Daniel Radcliffe, and I believe that reaching out for help is the bravest thing a person can do. If you are struggling and need support, call the Trevor Lifeline at 1-866-488-7386. It's free and confidential, and trained counsellors are there to listen 24/7 without judgment. To learn more about the Trevor Project's life-saving work for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender or questioning young people, go to thetrevorproject.org.
Welcome back to the show. So, the more skeptical listener may be thinking a few things at this point. My guess is that the skeptical listener might see things being blown out of proportion. Maybe that, so much of this is in our heads and that we need to stop caring so much about what other people think about us. And in a perfect world, I might even agree. Here's the thing you have to remember, though. Gay folks, at best estimate, are about 10% of the population. Trans people are at best estimate between 2 and 5% of the population. We have basically no political power aside from that given to us by our allies. I can quote statistics all day long, but suffice it to say we face disproportionately high levels of violence, poverty, homelessness, unemployment, underemployment, workplace discrimination, lack of access to healthcare, and the list goes on. All of these things add up to a lot of pressure for some of us to live under sometimes. So, my message to anyone seeking to be a better ally in this context is to honor the lived experiences of the people you talk to. Some of us have lived through horrible, horrible things that no person should ever have to be subject to. Some of us have lived through just these minor stresses that add up over a long period of time, like me. These things manifest themselves in a lot of ways, and sometimes in ways that don't seem to make sense. So please just honor that and let us express ourselves in that way.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that we found, a lot of good allies, in the especially in the atheist community. You're talking a little bit earlier about the atheist community, but I think there are a lot of atheists out there willing, they're willing to admit their own ignorance and eager to learn more.
Right, and that's the overwhelming reaction that I've gotten is that, like, wow, I've never met and talked to a trans person before, but I so want to learn.
Yes.
And I mean, even about, gay issues too. And I think that's an awesome attitude to have. What this was kind of spurred by the ally segment anyways was, so I made a post on Facebook about this whole Josh Duggar debacle.
Oh boy.
And yeah, and for those listening in archive, Josh Duggar is the oldest son of the Duggar family from that 19 Kids and Counting show on TLC. And until a few days ago, he was the head of the government lobbying arm of the Family Research Council, which is the group who sort of popularized the idea that the gay rights movement wants to normalize pedophilia, erase consent laws, and all this sort of stuff. And this guy was the head of their government lobbying arm. And it was found that he molested, 6 underage girls, 4 of which were his sisters, or 5, but 4 were his, either way.
I don't remember exactly,
when he was 14.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing people defend him made me irrationally angry.
Mm-hmm. Wasn't there someone who said, well, it was before he was a Christian?
Yeah, Ray Comfort. Ray Comfort said those were his BC days, as in before Christ days.
Sorry.
Which is another load of crap. But, so I posted, I forget what it, I posted, so Ryan Bell, who is, he's famous for being the Year Without God, the guy who did Year Without God. And part of his status was, he said, what if Josh Duggar was gay? What would the right be saying if he were gay and he had done this? They would be crucifying him.
And someone else posted, I think it was, what's his name? Mehmet, the friendly atheist guy? Hemet, thank you. He posted, what if someone who, on the left, what if Obama had been found out to have done these things? They wouldn't be defending him, they would be crucifying him, just like the same thing.
Exactly. And here's the thing. Without going too deep into this specific issue, even if, this is an if, even if we dismissed his actions as the actions of a 14-year-old who didn't know what he was doing, who knows better now, who's really sorry, who got help, whatever. Even if we can say that about his actions, I don't say that about his actions, by the way, I want to make that clear. But even if we granted that, for him to turn around and be this moral crusader, specifically against LGBT people, for an organization that suggested that gay people want to molest kids, when his mom recorded a robocall saying that this anti-discrimination law in Arkansas was putting girls and women in danger of being raped because trans people could use the correct bathrooms finally. When they have a skeleton that big in their closet and they put themselves on a pedestal like that, I was so angry. And I'm not sure that anyone who hasn't been on the receiving end of that kind of hatred can understand how angry that really, really made me. And some other people that I know too. We're on the receiving end of constant ridiculous accusations. Whether you're gay, bi, trans, whatever, any sort of queer or trans, we're on the receiving end of so much vitriol and so many accusations of, being these horrible people who want to do all these terrible things, when in reality, like, I'm just trying to live my life like anyone else. And if these people would get the hell out of the way, it wouldn't be that difficult to do. And I had one of my Christian friends, who I was already pretty annoyed with anyways, send me a message on Facebook saying that he was going to have to unfriend me because he was tired of my constant negativity and the negativity of all my friends surrounding these issues.
Okay.
And his comment on my status was, "Wow, what an unforgiving bunch."
Yeah. Well,
and
it has nothing to do
and
with
he said, I may re-add you later once this whole thing is cooled down. And I just said, nah, don't bother, and blocked him.
Yeah, definitely.
But I woke up in the morning to that. And I mean, I was like, I cried. I was so angry.
Yeah.
And I don't like feeling that way. I don't like being angry. I don't want to be angry. I don't have a victim mentality where I just want to be this poor, oppressed person, you know, who can cry out about being oppressed, like this caricature that the right makes out of, out of pretty much any sort of minority group. I mean, they do it to black people, they do it to Hispanics, they do it to Asian folks, they do it to LGBT people, they do it to poor people.
Yes.
It's just, it's a lot to handle.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I posted something about the whole Duggar debacle. I posted actually the post from Hemet Meta, and he gets pretty, calls out Christians in his post, and one of my Christian friends, oh my God, I'm not like that. Don't let me in with the rest of them. And I'm glad that you're not like that, but a lot of them are, and I don't know.
Well, and that's so my response to that is, instead of climbing all over each other to raise your hand and say, I'm not part of the problem, why not turn around and try to be part of the solution?
Right.
Because if you're a person in a position of privilege, you have the power to do that. In some ways, you have more power than I do to do that. So if you want to stop hearing about things like that, do something to fix it. Don't just stand up and say, nope, not me. I'm not part of the problem. Well, you may not be, and that's great. But all you're accomplishing by doing that is one, diminishing the things that we go through, and two, heaping on to the problem. So, that's a really roundabout way of saying, please don't be dismissive of the lived experiences of people like me and people like Jonathan. These situations are real. This is a lot to deal with. And, anybody who's a listener to this show has heard me gush and say many, many positive things about this community and about the things that I've gotten out of life. And this isn't to diminish any of that. It's just that those things have come at a very high price for me. And, these sort of rants here are kind of the illustration of the price that I pay and that so many people have paid to get to where we are and to get to the point where we can live our lives just, as the people that we are. So with that, my friends, that is going to do it for this incredibly, horribly depressing episode of the Atheist Manifesto on Secular Media Network. I want to say thank you to my co-host, Jonathan.
Of course.
You can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Manifesto. You can email us at thegatheistmanifesto@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at GatheistCali.
And I am on Twitter at NerdCub. That's with a K.
And you can find the show on Twitter at The Gatheists. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, and knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Atheist Manifesto.